Yeah, we talked about our teams. They worked on 20 points plan. Then they worked on prosperity and security document. And 20 points plan is very important. We have to discuss and sequencing. It's very important. Our teams talked about strategy, how to make step by step, and to bring this closer. And we will discuss this strategy.
Mr. President, are you willing to make territorial concessions?
We will speak about 20 points plan. There are in 20 points plan, 90% by the way was done by our two teams. I think they made a great job, great work, and yes, we will discuss these points also.
And there are great economic benefits for Ukraine also, because there's a lot of rebuilding to do. There's a lot of wealth to be had, and they have great wealth. Potentially, they have great wealth. They want to get started. But there's a great economic benefit for Ukraine in what we're talking about.
President Trump, some are saying that the recent attacks in the past couple of days that Russia's staged against Ukraine shows that President Putin isn't serious about peace. What is your reaction to that?
No, he's very serious. I think, I can say that I believe Ukraine has made some very strong attacks also. And I don't say that negatively. I think you probably have to. I don't say that negatively. But I think, he hasn't told me that, but there have been some explosions in various parts of Russia, and it looks to me like, I don't know, I don't think it came from the Congo. I don't think it came from the United States of America. It possibly came from Ukraine, but I haven't asked that question. Maybe I won't bother asking. They're fighting a war, and we'll see what happens. But I believe it's a war that we have two willing parties, we have two willing countries. They want to see it end. Look, the people of Ukraine want it to end, and the people of Russia want it to end, and the two leaders want it to end.
Mr. President, some of the economic benefits for Ukraine, Europe is holding some billions in frozen Russian assets. Do you believe that should go to Ukraine to help rebuild, or go back to Russia?
None of that's been determined, but it'll go. It's going to go very quickly. I think we're in final stages of talking, and we're going to see. Otherwise, it's going to go on for a long time. It'll either end, or it's going to go on for a long time, and millions of additional people are going to be killed. Millions.
Sir, would you say,
and nobody wants that.
So you said you're expecting to get to an agreement today.
What?
When you say that you think it will either end or go on for a long time, and you say you don't have a deadline, so what are you expecting out of today?
I just think we can move very rapidly. I really feel that. We've spoken. I know you had dinner with Steve. Steve Witkoff and Jared have done a fantastic job. And everybody has. Marco's been incredible. The whole group has been, our group has been incredible. And Ukraine appreciates it, and Russia appreciates it. They both want to see it end, and we're going to get it ended. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We'll see you, I think, at the end, but I do think we'll call it Europe also. We're going to speak to the European leaders. Thank you very much.
There they go, President Trump and President Zelenskyy walking inside the doors of Mar-a-Lago. No more comments or callbacks from the press, but warm handshakes, a wish of Merry Christmas from President Trump as well when the pair first met. Now the entourage follows in as well, and the discussions will continue at a pace, it's fair to say. We're going to bring you all the reaction and analysis now to those comments made by President Trump, in the most part, also by President Zelenskyy. Let's bring in our military analyst, Sean Bell. And we were both, Sean, scribbling away as fast as we could, weren't we, whilst President Trump was talking there. There was talks of security agreements, talks of Europeans being on board with some of the proposals that have been put forward. No real details being shared at this point. It would be unusual to do so, although it wouldn't be unusual for President Trump to let something slip. But he said that there had been a very good meeting as well with President Zelenskyy. He was trying to paint a picture of some element of unity about bringing everyone together to try and end this.
Yeah, I think what was interesting was, first of all, the dynamics. We've seen frosty and we've seen very welcoming. I think Trump's demeanour was much more meeting-orientated, less welcoming. I think he said, once again, both sides want a deal. Now, he's been saying this about President Putin for some time, and I think most of us, from a military perspective, say actions are not matched by words at the moment, and it's very difficult to see how President Trump has not been played. But President Trump still believes that that is the case. He also described President Zelenskyy as very brave. I thought also interesting, Trump puts deadlines up, doesn't he? Unless you agree this. when asked about deadlines, he said, I have no deadlines, but if this war doesn't get ended soon, it will continue for a long time. And I think that was a veiled threat to the fact that he's involved. If he can broker some sort of deal now, but the hint was he's not going to do this for the long term, and actually it would continue. He talked a lot about economic benefits as well, and I do wonder whether this is part of the European leaders' efforts to try to get Trump's interest piqued by the fact that there will be billions of pounds involved in reconstruction, and therefore is that something America wants to be involved with? I think the one thing he didn't really talk about much was Russia's, I mean, bluntly, Trump seems to ignore the fact that Russia invaded Ukraine. This is an illegal invasion, that Putin is an indicted war criminal. I suppose you have to ignore that if you're going to broker peace talks. But we're trying to see any hints that he's in bed with Putin here, or whether he's genuinely trying to broker something with an in-between view.
Sean, stick with us. Let's also bring in our US correspondent, Mark Stone, who's on West Palm Beach for us. Mark, you are closer to the action. What say you? What was your analysis of what we've just heard?
Yeah, literally on the beach. And I guess that's kind of the incongruous nature of this extraordinary meeting. And it is that. It is extraordinary. It is incongruous. Incongruous because we are at peak holiday season here down in West Palm Beach. As I got off the plane at Palm Beach International, I could see beyond me on the tarmac Zelensky's plane with the Ukrainian flag on the tail fin, and yet all around me holidaymakers trying to find some Floridian sun. I mean, it's kind of weird, but this is, they call it the Winter White House behind me, the home of Donald Trump, his mansion down here in Palm Beach. It's where he has spent Christmas, it's where he will spend New Year, and it is where Zelensky has been pulled to for this all-important meeting. Will it be a breakthrough moment? I doubt it. Will it be a moment where, once again, Ukraine's future is moulded, Europe's future is moulded? Yes, I think it will. And it is kind of odd that it's all these miles away in the sun of Florida, with a president who is on, then off, then on again with Vladimir Putin. That is Donald Trump. It is with him that this deal will be carved out. There's been much discussion, hasn't there, over the course of many months now, and certainly over the past few weeks, of this multi-point plan. It kind of mirrors the plan that Trump and his team put together for the Gaza ceasefire. At one point, the Ukraine plan was 26 points. Many people believed it had effectively been written by the Russians. That plan has now been changed. It's down to about 20 points, and much of it has been agreed. But obviously, with all these things, it's the last part that's the hardest part. And Zelensky thinks it is the right thing to do now for leader-to-leader talking to take place. And so that is why he is here in Mar-a-Lago, to talk about things like security guarantees, what America is willing to do in terms of guaranteeing Ukraine's future for the next years and decades. It's also, crucially, about territory. The Americans have been of the view that in order to bring this to an end, Ukraine has to give up to 20% of its land in the east of the country. Well, why would they do that? Well, so many Ukrainians will say, what was the point of fighting for so long if we now just have to hand over land to the Ukrainians? These are key issues that you can be sure will be discussed at Mar-a-Lago behind me over the course of the next couple of hours. And you can see the images here. That's the road, incidentally, that leads from Palm Beach to West Palm Beach, which is where where Mar-a-Lago is. And the traffic has been heavy. The road closed at times as Secret Service moved back and forth to escort President Zelensky in. But much of the traffic you see there will be Floridians looking for some sun. That's the kind of weird nature of the geopolitics that is taking place here today.
Mark in Palm Beach, do stay with us from Florida. Sean Bell, our military analyst, also with me in the studio. I also want to bring in, live from Ukraine, Alexander Merezhko, chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee in Ukraine's parliament. Good to have you with us. I appreciate you sharing your time. I assume you just saw the interaction between President Zelensky and President Trump. What did you make of what President Trump had to say in those opening few moments?
Thank you for having me. First of all, it was predictable. We don't see any tangible result, and there will be no result we shouldn't pay much attention to what Putin says, because Putin continues to be bent on destruction of Ukraine. And his best kind of response, which he has already given to all peace proposals, peace plans by President Trump, is the most recent bombardment, ruthless bombardment of Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities. Putin is using these negotiations for only one purpose, to avoid American
Mr. Mereshko, my apologies. Just 1 second. We're hearing from your leader and President Trump. Let's just take a listen. We will come back to you, I do promise.
He gave us a hamburger. We have to make him.
Alex, thanks. Press.
Okay.
Thank you, press. Thank you,
You
press.
lead the way. Go outside on the porch. Because we have the house closed today. Hey, Margot.
Just to that inopportune moment, that camera freezes. It looks as though the cameras are just leaving that room where the two sides are sitting side by side. Alexander Mereshko, my apologies for interrupting you there. You were just talking about your analysis, your perspective on the behaviour of the Russian leader, President Putin.
Yeah, first of all, Putin will never agree to any kind of deal which will prevent him from destroying Ukraine. His goal remains the same. He hasn't abandoned his ultimate goal to subjugate and to destroy Ukraine, to erase us from the map of the world. But he's using these negotiations in order to first of all, he is interested in provocation. That's why he's constantly raising the issue of withdrawal Ukrainian troops from Donbass. He understands that if Ukraine agrees to that, it will cause instability within the country. So it's a typical Putin's provocation against Ukraine. He failed to destroy us from outside. Now he's trying to destroy us from within. By polarizing society, by destabilizing the country, by using all kinds of provocations. And unfortunately, right now, he's trying to use our American friends for his goal to destroy Ukraine.
If you were sat opposite President Trump, if you were part of that negotiation team that has just taken their seats at the table here, what would you say? What would be the points that you would not move on, and what would be the points that you maybe would consider making any concessions on?
Point number one, don't negotiate with Russians. It's absolutely meaningless. It's absolutely useless. There are only two things you can do to make Putin to agree, for example, to unconditional ceasefire. More military assistance to Ukraine and more sanctions against Russia and against Russian allies, because the only thing you can do is to deprive Russia of its oil revenues, to stop Russian war machine. This is the most realistic scenario. All negotiations, peace plans, they are not going to work with Russians, absolutely.
If those peace plans don't work, then the only consequence that can happen, certainly in the short to medium term, is that the conflict continues, that there continues to be war and loss of life until either those economic or military pressures get so great that Putin has to acquiesce and pull back his forces. That's not going to happen in a day or two. Does Ukraine have the capacity? Do you have, and you talked about the fractures and splits within society, is there still the resolve to continue fighting this war if you so have to?
We just have no choice. We're fighting for our lives, our families, and our homes. We just have no choice but to continue to fight, because we understand if we stop, we will end up in Russian concentration camps. And the whole Ukraine will turn into Bucha Irpin, where Russians will be killing Ukrainians, torturing people, raping. We just can't afford this to happen. That's why we keep fighting. We have no choice.
Do you have concerns that some have echoed and raised, that if there is an agreement reached, which you wouldn't be supportive of, as testament to what you've just been saying, that if there is an agreement reached that sees 20% of your territory given, that in X many years' time, some people say that President Putin would look to continue to further, march into your sovereign territory?
Well, first of all, Putin he failed to occupy this territory by military hand. Now he's trying to use Americans to get it using political and diplomatic means for only one purpose, because he knows that he will use these territories for his further attacks against Ukraine. These territories, which are still under our control, has strategic importance for us. They're like fortresses which are defending other regions in Ukraine. Putin understands this. That's why he's trying to do it. He understands that it will take him years to occupy the rest of the territory of Donetsk Oblast, and it will take him millions of soldiers. And that's why he's trying to use, unfortunately, President Trump to reach this goal.
Alexander Marechko, really appreciate you joining us live from Kiev. Thank you for your time. Appreciated. Thank you. Let's cross to Florida and West Palm Beach, shall we? Mark Stone, just want to talk about some of the faces that we just saw in that little excerpt of the two sides sitting face to face. Who was at that table, and who are the key movers and shakers in this conversation?
Yeah, I wonder whether we can tell a bit of the direction of the conversation from who we see, certainly on the American side there. To Trump's left is the Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, and then to his left, and the closest to us there, is Dan Kane, who is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the most senior military man in the United States. Interesting that he is at this meeting because, of course, security guarantees and what security guarantees America is willing to give Ukraine and, by extension, to Europe. Well, that is a key part of the discussion. The other people around the table there on Trump's other side is Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, Susie Wiles. You can't quite make out her hair, her blonde hair, beyond the Secretary of State. There she is. And beyond her is Steve Witkoff, and beyond him, Jared Kushner, Donald Trump's son-in-law. Steve Witkoff, of course, has been such a key player in getting the Americans and the talks to the point that they're at now. Many people believe he's been hoodwinked by the Russians, that Vladimir Putin is taking him for a ride. He clearly would disagree. He believes that what he is trying to achieve on behalf of the man at the center of those shots there, Donald Trump, is a just and viable peace. But for me, the most interesting character there is the guy nearest to us, General Dan Kane, who is, as I say, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Next to him, incidentally, Stephen Miller, who is Donald Trump's deputy chief of staff, whose remit is usually much more domestic. He is the man who has been kind of giving the rocket boosters to America's domestic policy when it comes to immigration. So interesting that he is at this meeting as well. I'm not quite sure why that would be. Gareth, one other point I just want to make, having listened to your previous guest, I think we got a hint of what we might see happening over the coming months from that guest, because what he told you and what he displayed to you was a vigorous debate within Ukraine about what peace looks like, about what sort of peace Ukrainians want, and about how a lasting peace can be found. Now, what may come out of this meeting today is an offer by Putin to effectively put whatever is agreed at Mar-a-Lago to the Ukrainian people. So if an agreement is made at Mar-a-Lago today that actually, yes, it needs to be the case that Ukraine does give up a huge amount of land in the east of the country, well then what would happen potentially is that Zelenskyy would put that to a referendum to the Ukrainian people, which is why you will hear arguments like your previous guest gave you, vigorously debated across Ukraine, because there are differing views about. There are those who are weary about the war, who believe that you just need to cut the war, stop it now, and there are those who believe that fighting on is the right thing to do. And so that debate potentially will rage in the weeks ahead. But crucially, for Ukraine to have that debate and to have that referendum would require a ceasefire, which of course requires Russia's buy-in. And that too will be part of the discussion today.
It's an interesting point, Mark. I've interviewed two Ukrainian MPs in the past 2 days, and they have both said, in effect, that they are grateful for the work that President Zelenskyy is doing on the international stage and meeting with the the American leaders, speaking to the European leaders, keeping close contacts with Keir Starmer as well. But they both have pointed to the fracturing, the splitting, the tension, the challenges, the fatigue, one should imagine, as well, within Ukrainian society. And that surely will be a point that won't be lost on President Putin. But that won't be a point, one should imagine, that President Trump will have too many concerns about.
I guess the the fear all along by Europeans who won't express this publicly. And I remember talking to Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, who has played a very particular hand when it comes to dealing with Putin. It's the daddy hand, I guess you could call it, where he has effectively been as sycophantic as he can be to Trump, calling him daddy, because he knows that kind of will help. Now, publicly, he will say everything that you've heard him say. Privately, he and the other European leaders are clearly very, very worried that what Trump is trying to achieve here is a peace, yes, but a short-term peace, and that longer term, the security of the European continent will be put at greater risk because of a badly stitched together peace that comes now, which is why they want the security guarantees from America to be put in place, to be written down, to be signed off, and to be formally agreed by Donald Trump. But you know, will he do that? Because more broadly, his world vision seems to be one of hemispheres of influence, and he's less worried, less bothered about the European hemisphere. He's far more worried about the Western hemisphere. And that is his sphere of influence, where he wants to focus his attention. So I guess that's the real worry, that Trump will go for a short-term fix and that the peace longer term will be very, very fragile, with Putin able to fight another day.
Mark Stone in Palm Beach, good to have you with us. Thank you for the moment. Let's bring in Sean Bell, our military analyst, and let's just pick up on a couple of points that the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee for the Ukrainian Parliament, Alexander Mareshko, made about the challenges of pursuing this conflict. He says they've got to continue to fight for their lives. And he said, look, you know, we have to. For Russia, they also have to sacrifice thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of lives to make any meaningful progress, as Alexander Mareshko made, with regards to these fortified towns.
Yeah, but I think for me, it resonates with the view when I was out there. We tend to look at this conflict as it started 4 years ago, and yeah, everybody just settled down and maybe it'll go away again. Having been out there, they do talk about this being at least 300 years that Russia's been trying to wipe out their country, their language, their culture and everything. They don't see this as something that started a few years ago. And the passion that they completely do not trust President Putin at all, full stop. And therefore, the idea of negotiating simply gives President Putin, in the Ukrainian view, an opportunity to lie, to deceive and to play people long. And we saw that coming out loud and clear with that interview. Yet President Trump comes from a world in which it's all about negotiation, because you give a bit of ground and then you get to a deal. So there's a fundamental mismatch at the moment between what President Zelenskyy clearly wants from this and what President Trump wants.
And with regards to that Ukrainian perspective, you could forgive them for thinking that. You know, only the day before, 200,000 or so Russian servicemen crossed the border in what was attempting to be a lightning strike and take out and decapitate the Ukrainian government. President Putin said he had no intention of invading. So you can understand where the Ukrainian perspective comes from, and you can probably understand, as Mark Stone alluded to there, the European frustration in sometimes maybe some members of the Trump administration taking the Kremlin at its word.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point Mark made about the Europeans, I think, is very valid. We were talking off air that some of my senior military colleagues are getting quite angry at the moment because they sense that the government isn't really taking the whole war seriously and the threat to European security. Because if the war isn't solved, and I'm one of those who thinks it's going to be very difficult for President Trump to stop the war unless he's prepared to use economic or military force to stop Putin, in other words, carrot and stick, and to date he's not shown any appetite for doing that. And therefore, it's likely that Trump just sees this as a European problem. It's on the European continent, you deal with it. But the problem is, as Mark says, we're not the United States of Europe over here. You know, we are a land body, but every country own language, own culture, own priorities. And therefore, how do you build a coherent force against? And militarily, whilst we've been promising we're going to go up to 3.5–5% of GDP, as we stand today, we're configured for wars of choice overseas, not wars of national survival. We've got grave shortcomings in our own military capability, let alone how would we support Ukraine. So there's a degree of concern verging on panic, I suspect, with some of the political leaders to see what President Trump does now. Do I think we're going to get a solution? No, but there's a grave worry that Trump actually pulls America further away from this. That would suit Putin because he's driven a wedge then between America and Europe, a wedge into NATO. That would definitely embolden Putin, and that's a grave worry for European security.